My name is Elena Hartwell, and at 29 years old, I stood in a bridal boutique holding the dress of my dreams while my mother explained over the phone why she would not be attending my wedding. The reason was simple yet devastating. My younger sister Vanessa had scheduled her baby shower for the exact same day, and according to my mother, a first grandchild trumped a middle daughter's marriage. What happened next changed everything, and 5 years later, when my family discovered who I had actually married, they came crawling back with requests I never expected. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Where are you watching from today? If you have ever been overlooked by the people who should have celebrated you most, hit subscribe because my story might just show you that sometimes the greatest success comes from those who doubted you learning exactly what they missed. Family dynamics are complex, and mine was no exception. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, the middle of 3 daughters in what appeared from the outside to be a typical upper-middle-class household. My father, Richard Hartwell, built a successful regional accounting firm that provided comfortable living for our family. My mother, Patricia, devoted herself to maintaining our social standing in the community, serving on charity boards and hosting elaborate dinner parties that showcased our family's success. My older sister, Monica, was the academic achiever who graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern before attending Yale Law School. She married a corporate attorney named Bradley, and together they embodied the professional power couple my parents had always envisioned. Their wedding 5 years before mine had been a spectacle with over 300 guests, a reception at the city's most prestigious country club, and coverage in the local society pages that my mother collected and displayed prominently. Then there was Vanessa, the baby of the family by 7 years. She possessed the effortless charm and beauty that seemed to open doors without effort. While Monica achieved through relentless discipline and I succeeded through persistent hard work, Vanessa glided through life on natural charisma. She attended a small liberal arts college where she majored in communications and minored in collecting admirers. After graduation, she moved back home and worked in social media marketing for a local boutique, a position that allowed her flexibility and required minimal commitment. I occupied the space between these two extremes. I was not brilliant enough to match Monica's academic achievements, nor charming enough to replicate Vanessa's social ease. What I possessed was determination, and an analytical mind that excelled at identifying problems and creating solutions. I attended Ohio State University, where I studied business administration with a focus on operations management. My grades were solid rather than exceptional, my social life active but not remarkable. I was, in many ways, the daughter who was easy to overlook because I neither dramatically succeeded nor spectacularly failed. After graduation, I joined a mid-sized consulting firm in Columbus, starting as a junior analyst working on supply chain optimization projects. The work was technical and demanding, requiring long hours analyzing data and creating presentations for clients who often dismissed my contributions because of my age and gender. I developed a reputation for thoroughness and reliability, qualities that earned respect from colleagues, even if they did not generate the same acclaim as more visible talents. My family's reaction to my career choice was tepid at best. My father had hoped I might join his accounting firm, viewing my business degree as preparation for eventually taking over the family company. When I explained that I wanted to forge my own path in consulting, his disappointment was palpable, though he masked it with generic encouragement. My mother seemed confused by my choice, unable to understand why I would work such long hours for a company that was not our own. Monica offered condescending advice about leveraging my position to attend law school, assuming that consulting was merely a stepping stone to something more prestigious. Vanessa showed polite disinterest, changing the subject whenever my work came up in conversation. The pattern of being overlooked within my family had been established over decades. At Monica's numerous academic award ceremonies throughout our childhood, I sat in audiences clapping for achievements I could never replicate. During Vanessa's high school years, when her social calendar dominated family scheduling, I adjusted my own plans repeatedly to accommodate rides to parties and pickups from events. When Monica's law school graduation conflicted with my own college graduation ceremony, my parents attended hers while my grandmother represented the family at mine. I told myself these choices made logical sense. Monica's accomplishments were more significant. Vanessa needed more support because she was younger. My grandmother was delighted to attend my graduation. I convinced myself that being the low-maintenance daughter was a positive trait, something that demonstrated my independence and maturity. What I did not recognize until much later was that I had internalized the message that my milestones mattered less, that my needs were always negotiable in ways that my sister's needs were not. My professional life progressed steadily if unremarkably throughout my 20s. I received regular promotions at the consulting firm, moving from junior analyst to senior analyst and eventually to project manager. My specialization in supply chain optimization led to increasingly complex assignments with larger clients. I traveled frequently for work, spending weeks at manufacturing facilities and distribution centers across the Midwest, identifying inefficiencies and designing improved processes. The work was satisfying in its concrete results, even if it lacked the prestige my family seemed to value. It was during one of these client assignments that I met David Chan. I had been sent to analyze operations at a struggling manufacturing company outside of Detroit, a mid-sized operation that produced automotive components and was hemorrhaging money due to outdated processes and poor inventory management. David was the newly appointed Chief Operating Officer, brought in by the board to either turn the company around or prepare it for sale. He was 34, 5 years my senior, with an engineering degree from MIT and an MBA from Stanford. His resume included stints at General Electric and a successful turnaround of a similar manufacturing operation in the Pacific Northwest. Our first meeting was contentious. David had strong opinions about what the company needed, and my preliminary analysis suggested that several of his assumptions were incorrect. We spent 3 hours in a conference room debating inventory turnover ratios and production scheduling methodologies, neither willing to concede ground. By the end of the meeting, we had developed a grudging respect for each other's expertise, even if we disagreed on implementation strategies. Over the following weeks, as I dove deeper into the company's operations, David and I developed a productive working relationship. He challenged my recommendations, forcing me to defend my analysis with additional data. I pushed back on his proposed changes when they conflicted with the operational realities I had observed on the factory floor. The friction was professional rather than personal, driven by mutual commitment to solving the company's problems rather than ego protection. The breakthrough came during a late-night working session 6 weeks into the engagement. We were reviewing production line configurations, trying to determine how to reduce changeover times without significant capital investment. David had been skeptical of my proposal to reorganize the warehouse layout, arguing that the disruption would cost more than any efficiency gains. I had prepared a detailed analysis showing how the reorganization would reduce material handling time by 18% and improve inventory accuracy by 23%. As I walked him through the numbers, explaining the methodology behind my calculations and the assumptions I had tested, I watched his expression shift from skepticism to interest to genuine excitement. When I finished the presentation, he sat back in his chair and smiled, the first unguarded expression I had seen from him. "That analysis is brilliant," he said simply. "I have been approaching this completely wrong. Your solution solves 3 problems I thought were unrelated." That moment marked a shift in our relationship. We began meeting regularly outside of formal project discussions, grabbing coffee before morning meetings or staying late to debate business philosophy. I learned that David had grown up in Seattle, the son of Taiwanese immigrants who had built a small but successful import business. He had watched his parents work 16-hour days to provide opportunities for their children, instilling in him both a relentless work ethic and an appreciation for operational excellence. His success in corporate America had come through a combination of technical expertise and an ability to see patterns that others missed, qualities I recognized in myself. David learned that I came from a family where achievement was expected but rarely celebrated, where I had spent my life trying to prove my worth through performance rather than personality. He understood the weight of family expectations in ways that many of my previous relationships had not. His own parents had been disappointed when he chose operations management over the medical career they had envisioned, and he had spent years reconciling his professional success with their vision of what success should look like. Our relationship evolved naturally from professional respect to personal connection. We started spending time together outside of work, exploring Detroit's surprisingly vibrant food scene and attending Tiger games when our schedules allowed. David appreciated my analytical mind and my refusal to accept easy answers. I valued his strategic thinking and his ability to inspire teams to exceed their own expectations. By the time my consulting engagement ended 4 months after we met, we were dating seriously, and the manufacturing company was on track to achieve profitability within the fiscal year. The transformation of that struggling operation became a significant case study within my consulting firm. The combination of my analytical approach and David's strategic leadership had produced results that exceeded even optimistic projections. The company not only returned to profitability, but became an acquisition target for a larger automotive supplier, eventually selling for a substantial premium that rewarded both the board's patience and the employees' commitment to change. My role in the turnaround earned me recognition within the firm and an unexpected opportunity. One of the partners had been impressed enough with my work to recommend me for a position with a boutique strategy consulting firm based in Chicago. The firm specialized in corporate turnarounds and operational transformations, working with private equity clients to improve portfolio companies. The position would mean leaving Columbus and the comfortable if unexciting career I had built, but it represented a significant step forward professionally. The compensation was nearly double my current salary, and the work would involve leading engagements rather than supporting them. David encouraged me to take the position without hesitation. By this point, we had been dating for nearly a year, and he had already begun exploring opportunities in Chicago as well. His success with the Detroit turnaround had generated interest from several private equity firms looking for operating executives who could manage portfolio companies. Within 2 months of my accepting the Chicago position, David received an offer to become the chief executive officer of a struggling industrial equipment manufacturer, backed by a prominent private equity firm. The company was hemorrhaging money, had toxic labor relations, and faced potential bankruptcy if performance did not improve dramatically within 18 months. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Most executives would have viewed the opportunity as career suicide, taking responsibility for a failing company with minimal runway and entrenched problems. David saw it as the ultimate test of his abilities and an opportunity to build something significant. He accepted the position with the same enthusiasm he brought to analyzing complex operational challenges, and we moved to Chicago together, renting a high-rise apartment with views of Lake Michigan that seemed impossibly luxurious compared to my previous living situations. My family's reaction to these career moves was characteristically muted. My father acknowledged that the compensation increase was substantial, but questioned whether consulting was a sustainable long-term career. My mother worried about me moving to a larger city where I knew no one, seemingly forgetting that I would be living with David. Monica offered unsolicited advice about negotiating my compensation package, assuming I had not adequately advocated for myself. Vanessa asked if Chicago had good shopping and whether I would have time to visit often. No one asked about David in any meaningful way. They knew I was dating someone I had met through work, and they had met him briefly during a single weekend visit to Columbus 6 months into our relationship. The meeting had been cordial but superficial, with my family asking polite questions about his background while clearly remaining uninterested in deeper connection. My father discussed business generically without engaging with David's specific expertise. My mother commented on his polite manners but seemed puzzled by his intensity. Monica barely spoke to him, distracted by her own career demands. Vanessa spent most of the dinner texting friends about weekend plans. I told myself their lack of engagement was simply because the relationship was still relatively new, that they would become more invested once David and I had been together longer. What I did not recognize was that their disinterest reflected a broader pattern of viewing my life as less significant than my sister's lives, my choices as less important than their preferences. In Chicago, both David and I threw ourselves into our work with an intensity that left little room for anything else. My consulting engagements involved traveling Monday through Thursday most weeks, working with manufacturing companies and distribution centers across the industrial Midwest. I analyzed operations, interviewed employees at every level, reviewed financial data, and developed recommendations that often required painful changes to long-established practices. The work was intellectually demanding and emotionally draining, requiring me to deliver difficult truths to executives who were often defensive about their company's failures. David's challenges were even more severe. The industrial equipment manufacturer he had been hired to lead was in worse condition than even the private equity firm had disclosed. Employee morale was catastrophic after years of mismanagement and cost-cutting. Key customers had begun seeking alternative suppliers due to quality problems and late deliveries. The balance sheet was precarious, with debt covenants that provided almost no margin for error. David spent his first 3 months simply stabilizing the situation, preventing complete collapse while he assessed the depth of the problems. We supported each other through the intensity of those early Chicago months, celebrating small victories and commiserating over setbacks. When David successfully negotiated a contract extension with a major customer who had been planning to leave, we opened a bottle of champagne in our apartment and toasted to the first of many wins to come. When I delivered a particularly brutal presentation to a client CEO whose mismanagement had created the problems I was documenting, David reminded me that honest diagnosis was essential for effective treatment, even when it was painful to hear. 18 months into our Chicago life, David proposed during a weekend trip to Door County. We had rented a cottage overlooking Lake Michigan, taking a rare break from work demands to simply be together without the constant pressure of problems needing solutions. On a clear October evening, as we walked along the shore watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, David stopped and turned to me with an expression of complete certainty. "Elena, you are the most remarkable person I have ever known," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion behind it. "You see problems that others miss and create solutions that seem obvious only after you explain them. You challenge me to be better at everything I do. You make me laugh when I am taking myself too seriously. I cannot imagine building a life with anyone else. Will you marry me?" The ring was elegant and understated, a single diamond in a platinum setting that reflected David's appreciation for quality without ostentation. I said yes without hesitation, knowing with complete certainty that I was choosing the right partner for building the life I wanted. We called our families that evening to share the news, and the differences in reactions were immediately apparent. David's parents were overjoyed, his mother crying with happiness and his father expressing pride in his son's choice of partner. They asked thoughtful questions about our plans and made clear that they looked forward to welcoming me fully into their family. The warmth of their response filled me with gratitude and underscored what genuine family support felt like. My family's reaction was more complicated. My mother's first question was whether we had set a date, followed immediately by concerns about how much time she would need to plan properly. My father offered congratulations that sounded more like acknowledgement of a business transaction than celebration of a personal milestone. Monica asked practical questions about the ring's value and whether David had discussed the financial implications of marriage. Vanessa squealed appropriately but quickly turned the conversation to her own dating life and whether her current boyfriend might propose soon. No one asked how I felt. No one inquired about the proposal itself or what our vision for married life might be. No one expressed curiosity about David beyond surface details. The conversation lasted less than 15 minutes before my mother had to leave for a charity board meeting, and everyone else found reasons to end the call. I tried not to let their tepid response diminish my own happiness, reminding myself that their emotional availability had always been limited and their enthusiasm for my achievements had always been muted. David, who had witnessed the phone call, held me afterward without saying anything, understanding that sometimes the absence of proper celebration hurt more than active criticism. We began planning a wedding that reflected our values and our vision for our marriage. Neither of us wanted an enormous elaborate affair that prioritized spectacle over meaning. We chose a venue in downtown Chicago, a historic building with exposed brick and large windows that flooded the space with natural light. We planned for 150 guests, primarily close friends and colleagues who had been part of our lives in meaningful ways. The ceremony would be secular and personal, with vows we wrote ourselves reflecting our commitment to partnership and mutual support. The date we selected was May 15th, a Saturday in late spring when Chicago weather would hopefully be pleasant and the city would be alive with the energy of emerging summer. We sent save-the-date cards 6 months in advance, giving our families and friends ample time to make travel arrangements. The wedding was still 8 months away, plenty of time for planning while we continued managing our demanding careers. My family responded to the save-the-date cards with acknowledgement but little enthusiasm. My mother called to discuss logistics, asking about hotels and whether we had selected a caterer yet. She mentioned that she hoped the wedding would not be too casual, as Monica's wedding had set a certain standard that people in their social circle would expect us to maintain. I explained that we were planning something more intimate and personal, which she received with audible skepticism but did not directly challenge. 3 months after we sent the save-the-date cards, with the wedding now 5 months away, my sister Vanessa called with news she could barely contain through her excitement. She was pregnant. She and her boyfriend Marcus had not been planning to start a family, but the pregnancy was welcome news that they were embracing with joy. She was approximately 8 weeks along, with a due date in early August. The timeline meant she would be visibly pregnant at my May wedding but not yet uncomfortable, and she assured me she was thrilled to be part of my special day. I congratulated her genuinely, happy that she was happy and excited about the prospect of becoming an aunt. The conversation was warm and positive, and I felt hopeful that this milestone in her life might bring our family closer together. What I did not anticipate was how quickly Vanessa's pregnancy would consume all family attention and energy, overshadowing every other consideration. Within weeks, every family phone call centered on Vanessa's pregnancy symptoms, her doctor appointments, her nursery planning, her maternity wardrobe needs. My mother threw herself into grandmother preparation with an intensity one had never witnessed her direct toward any of my achievements. She researched the best strollers and car seats, debated the merits of various parenting philosophies, and began planning a nursery makeover at Vanessa's apartment that would cost thousands of dollars. My father, typically reserved about emotional matters, became uncharacteristically effusive about the prospect of a grandchild, discussing legacy and family continuity in ways that had never been part of our previous conversations. Monica, already a mother to a 3-year-old daughter named Charlotte, offered advice with the authority of experience and began planning elaborate gifts that demonstrated her superior parenting knowledge. The family group chat that had been relatively quiet became constantly active with pregnancy updates, cute baby item photos, and discussions of baby shower possibilities. My own wedding planning, which had never generated much family enthusiasm, became virtually invisible in the shadow of Vanessa's pregnancy. When I mentioned during a phone call that we had finalized our catering menu, my mother responded with distracted acknowledgement before immediately returning to a discussion of whether Vanessa should register for a bassinet or a full crib. When I sent photos of potential bridesmaid dress options to the family group chat, the message received 3 reactions and no comments, while Vanessa's ultrasound photo posted an hour later generated 40 responses and multiple phone calls. I tried to be understanding. A first grandchild was objectively exciting, and Vanessa's happiness was genuine and infectious. I reminded myself that my wedding was still several months away, and that family attention would naturally shift back to my event as it approached. I focused on the elements of wedding planning that David and I could control, finding joy in selecting music and designing invitations that reflected our personalities, rather than seeking validation from family members who seemed increasingly distracted. 4 months before my wedding, with planning in full swing and deposits paid on virtually every vendor, Vanessa announced during a family dinner that she wanted to have her baby shower on May 15th, the same day as my wedding. The silence that followed Vanessa's announcement stretched across the dinner table like a physical presence. I had traveled back to Columbus for this family gathering, one of the increasingly rare weekends when my consulting schedule allowed me to visit. David had remained in Chicago, managing a critical supplier negotiation that could not be postponed. The dinner was at my parents' house, a familiar setting where countless family decisions had been made over the years, though rarely had any of those decisions affected me so directly. Vanessa sat beside Marcus, her hand resting on the barely visible curve of her stomach, her face radiating the particular glow that seemed to accompany her pregnancy. She had made her announcement with the casual confidence of someone who assumed her desires would naturally take precedence, a confidence born from years of experience proving that assumption correct. May 15th would be perfect for the baby shower, she explained, because she would be approximately 32 weeks pregnant, far enough along to be visibly expecting but not so late in the pregnancy that she would be uncomfortable. The timing would allow out-of-town guests to travel without concern about early labor, and the spring weather would be ideal for the outdoor garden party she envisioned. My mother's face lit up with immediate enthusiasm. "What a wonderful idea," she exclaimed, already mentally cataloging the planning that would be required. "We could host it here at the house." The gardens will be beautiful that time of year. And we have plenty of space for the number of guests you will want to invite. I have been looking at baby shower themes, and there are so many charming options. Monica nodded her approval, adding her own suggestions about vendors and caterers who had done excellent work for events she had hosted. May 15th gives us plenty of time to plan something really special, she agreed. This will be such a celebration for the whole family. I set down my fork carefully. My appetite suddenly vanished despite having barely touched the meal my mother had prepared. May 15th is my wedding day, I said quietly, the words feeling surreal even as I spoke them. We sent save-the-date cards months ago. Everyone received them. The reminder seemed to genuinely surprise my family, as though my wedding date was a detail they had forgotten entirely despite the save-the-date card that had been displayed on my parents' refrigerator for weeks before being replaced by Vanessa's ultrasound photo. My mother's expression shifted from enthusiasm to confusion, as though she could not quite reconcile these two events occurring on the same date. "Oh," Vanessa said, her tone suggesting mild inconvenience rather than recognition of a significant conflict. "I forgot your wedding was that day." Her use of the word forgot rather than remembered or realized revealed everything about how she perceived the situation. My wedding was not a fixed point around which other plans should be arranged, but rather a flexible detail that could be adjusted to accommodate more important priorities. "Well," my mother said slowly, clearly trying to navigate between her daughters without taking an explicit position, "that does create a scheduling challenge." She turned to me with an expression that attempted sympathy while already suggesting compromise. "Elena, would it be possible to move your wedding date? I know you have been planning for May 15th, but perhaps another weekend would work just as well. June might even be nicer weather." The suggestion hung in the air, so absurd that I initially could not formulate a response. Move my wedding date? Abandon months of planning, lose thousands of dollars in deposits, inconvenience 150 guests who had already made travel arrangements, all so that my sister could have her baby shower on her preferred day. The request would have been laughable if it had not been so perfectly representative of my family's lifelong assumption that my needs were negotiable in ways that my sister's needs were not. "I cannot move my wedding date," I said, keeping my voice level despite the anger beginning to build beneath my carefully maintained composure. "We have a venue contract, catering commitments, hotel blocks, and 150 guests who have already planned to attend. Moving the date would cost tens of thousands of dollars and create chaos for everyone who has made arrangements." My father, who had been silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke. "These things can be rescheduled, Elena. Vendors understand that circumstances change. I am sure if you explain the situation they would be accommodating." The situation? As though Vanessa's preference for a particular baby shower date constituted a situation that justified appending months of wedding planning. As though my sister's desire for a garden party in spring weather was equivalent to an actual emergency that required everyone to adjust their plans. "This is not a situation that requires rescheduling my wedding," I replied, my tone sharpening despite my efforts to remain calm. "This is Vanessa choosing to schedule her baby shower on a date she knew was already taken. There are dozens of other weekends available. Why does it have to be May 15th? Vanessa's expression shifted from casual confidence to defensive irritation. "I did not choose May 15th to conflict with your wedding, Elena. It is just the best date for the baby shower based on my due date and when I will be most comfortable. You are acting like I am doing this on purpose. Whether intentional or not, the effect is the same," I countered. "You are asking me to move my wedding so you can have a party on your preferred date. That is not reasonable." Monica interjected with the tone she used when mediating disputes, a particular blend of authority and condescension that she had perfected during her legal career. "Let us all take a breath and think about this logically. Elena, I understand you are attached to your wedding date, but weddings can be moved. It happens all the time. A baby shower is more time-sensitive because of Vanessa's pregnancy timeline. It makes practical sense for you to be the one who adjusts." The casual dismissal of my wedding as something I was merely attached to, as though it were a preference rather than a commitment involving significant planning and expense, crystallized everything wrong with my family's perception of my life. Monica's logical argument ignored the fundamental inequality of expecting me to absorb all the inconvenience and cost so that Vanessa could avoid the minor accommodation of selecting a different date. "A baby shower can happen on any weekend within a several-week window," I said, addressing Monica directly. A wedding date is fixed months in advance with contracts and commitments that cannot be easily changed. The practical solution is for Vanessa to choose a different date for her baby shower. Not for me to move my entire wedding. But May 15th is perfect for what Vanessa has envisioned, my mother insisted, her tone taking on the particular quality that indicated she was becoming emotionally invested in a position and would defend it regardless of logic. She wants an outdoor garden party, and the timing is ideal for that. If we push it to June, the weather might be too hot. If we move it earlier, she will not be showing as much and it will not have the same celebratory feel. The detailed consideration of Vanessa's preferences, weighed against the complete absence of consideration for my own, demonstrated the dynamic that had governed our family for as long as I could remember. Vanessa's desire for perfect weather and optimal visibility of her pregnancy bump was treated as a legitimate factor requiring accommodation, while my desire to marry on the date I had chosen was dismissed as mere attachment that should yield to more important priorities. What about the week before or the week after, I suggested, trying to find compromise even as I recognized the futility of the effort. May 8th or May 22nd would give Vanessa essentially the same weather and pregnancy timeline without conflicting with my wedding. Vanessa shook her head immediately. May 8th is too early. I will only be 31 weeks and I want to be further along so people can really see the baby bump. May 22nd is too close to Memorial Day weekend. People will have travel plans and attendance will suffer. So my wedding should suffer instead, I said, no longer attempting to hide my anger. The 150 people who have already planned to attend my wedding should be inconvenienced, so that your baby shower guests are not impacted by Memorial Day weekend. You are being selfish, Vanessa said, her voice rising to match mine. This is my first baby, the first grandchild in this family. This is a huge milestone, and you are acting like your wedding is more important. My wedding is more important to me, I replied. Just like your baby shower is more important to you. The difference is that I am not asking you to sacrifice anything. I am asking you to choose a different date from the dozens of available weekends, while you are asking me to move an event that has been planned for months. Elena, my mother said, her tone shifting to the particular quality that indicated disappointment, I expected more understanding from you. Family means making sacrifices for each other. And right now Vanessa needs our support. She is bringing a new life into this world, creating the next generation of our family. That takes precedence over a party, no matter how expensive or elaborately planned. The reduction of my wedding to a party, delivered with the implicit suggestion that my resistance to rescheduling reflected a character flaw rather than reasonable boundary setting, struck with particular cruelty. My mother's invocation of family sacrifice ignored the reality that sacrifice in our family had always been unidirectional, flowing from me toward my sisters without reciprocation or even acknowledgement. This is not a party, I said, my voice tight with controlled emotion. This is my wedding. This is the day I am committing to spending my life with the person I love. This matters to me, and it should matter to all of you. Of course it matters, my father said, employing the placating tone he used when attempting to defuse conflict without actually addressing underlying problems. No one is saying your wedding does not matter. We are simply asking you to be flexible about the timing. The marriage itself is what is important, not the specific date. The specific date is important because it is the date we chose, the date our guests have planned for, and the date we have built our plans around, I countered. And beyond the practical considerations, the fact that you are asking me to change it rather than asking Vanessa to select a different weekend tells me exactly how this family values my priorities compared to hers. That is not fair, Monica objected. We value all our daughters equally. This is about logistics and practical considerations, not about who matters more. If that were true, then Vanessa would choose a different date for her baby shower, I replied. The logistics clearly favor that solution. The only reason we are even having this conversation is because you have already decided that her preference takes precedence over my commitment. The remainder of the dinner deteriorated into tense silence punctuated by half-hearted attempts at conversation about neutral topics. I excused myself as soon as politely possible, declining my mother's offer of dessert and coffee. The drive back to my hotel took me through familiar Columbus streets that suddenly felt foreign, as though I were seeing my hometown through new eyes that recognized how much I had accepted over the years without question. In my hotel room, I called David to recount the evening's conversation. His reaction moved through disbelief, anger on my behalf, and finally a calm certainty that strengthened my own resolve. They are actually asking you to move our wedding date, he said, the statement seeking confirmation rather than posing a question. For a baby shower. Yes, I confirmed. My mother thinks vendors will understand and accommodate the change. My father thinks the specific date does not matter. Monica thinks it is the logical solution because baby showers are time-sensitive. And Vanessa apparently forgot my wedding was on May 15th despite having received a save-the-date card months ago. What do you want to do? David asked, his tone making clear that whatever I decided would have his full support. This is your family and your decision. I will stand with you either way, but this is your call to make. I want to keep our wedding date, I said without hesitation. I want to marry you on May 15th as we planned. And I want my family to choose whether to attend my wedding or Vanessa's baby shower, because I am not moving our date to accommodate her preference. Then that is what we will do, David confirmed. And if they choose the baby shower, that tells you everything you need to know about where you stand in their priorities. The following morning, I met my mother for brunch at her request. She arrived with the determined expression of someone prepared to advocate for a position she had already decided was correct. The restaurant she had chosen was a familiar location where we had shared countless meals over the years, a setting perhaps intended to leverage nostalgia and family connection in service of her argument. I ordered coffee and waited for her to begin, knowing that she had orchestrated this meeting with a specific objective in mind. She spent several minutes discussing neutral topics, asking about my flight schedule and whether my Chicago apartment had sufficient heat, before finally transitioning to the subject we both knew was the purpose of our gathering. I spoke with Vanessa last night after you left, she began, her tone careful and measured. She is very hurt by your reaction yesterday. She feels like you are not supporting her during one of the most important times in her life. I took a sip of coffee before responding, using the moment to compose my thoughts. I am not unsupportive of Vanessa's pregnancy. I am refusing to move my wedding date to accommodate her baby shower preference. Those are two very different things. To her they feel the same, my mother replied. She has been so excited about this baby. And now she feels like the family is divided instead of celebrating together. This is supposed to be a happy time and instead there is conflict. The conflict exists because Vanessa chose to schedule her baby shower on my wedding date, I observed. If she had chosen any other available weekend, we would not be having this conversation. The division you are describing is a consequence of her decision, not my response to it. My mother sighed, a particular exhalation that I recognize from childhood as the precursor to emotional manipulation disguised as maternal concern. Elena, I understand that you have put time and energy into planning your wedding, but I am asking you to consider the bigger picture here. Vanessa is bringing a child into this world, creating a legacy that will continue after all of us are gone. Your wedding is one day, but this baby represents the future of our family. My marriage represents my future, I countered. The fact that you see those as incomparable, with Vanessa's baby automatically taking precedence, is exactly the problem I am trying to articulate. My life and my commitment should matter as much as hers, but they never have in this family. You are being dramatic, she said, her tone shifting from persuasion to dismissal. No one has ever treated you as less important than your sisters. We have supported all of you equally throughout your lives. The assertion was so divorced from reality that I almost laughed. Monica's law school graduation conflicted with my college graduation and you attended hers, I said, keeping my voice level. When I was in the hospital with appendicitis during high school, you left after 2 hours to take Vanessa to a volleyball game. You have missed multiple work milestones in my career, but have never missed one of Monica's court appearances, or one of Vanessa's social media campaigns. The pattern has been consistent for my entire life. And now you are asking me to move my wedding to accommodate Vanessa's baby shower. That is not equal treatment. Those situations were all different, my mother protested. But her expression suggested she recognized at least some truth in my examples. We have always tried to be there for all our daughters when it mattered most. When it mattered most to you, I clarified. When it aligned with what you considered important or what was most convenient. But when there were conflicts, when someone had to compromise or be disappointed, it was always me. And I accepted that for years because I told myself it was not intentional, that I was reading too much into individual incidents. But this situation makes the pattern impossible to ignore. My mother's eyes filled with tears, a tactic that had successfully ended many difficult conversations throughout my childhood. "I love you, Elena," she said, her voice wavering with emotion. "I have always loved all my daughters equally. If I have failed to show that adequately, I am sorry. But right now, I am asking you to be the bigger person, to make this sacrifice for your sister and for family harmony." Being the bigger person has meant being the person who always adjusts, always accommodates, always accepts less, I replied, refusing to let her tears derail the conversation. "I am not willing to continue that pattern. I am keeping my wedding date. Vanessa can choose to move her baby shower or proceed with it on May 15th, but I am not changing my plans." The tears stopped abruptly, replaced by an expression of disappointment that bordered on anger. "If you insist on keeping that date, knowing it conflicts with Vanessa's baby shower, you are forcing the family to choose between events. That is incredibly unfair to everyone, especially to me and your father. We want to be at both celebrations, but you are making that impossible." "Vanessa is making that impossible by refusing to select a different date for her baby shower," I corrected. "There are 4 other weekends in May and at least 8 weekends in April and June that would work equally well for her purposes. The only reason the family faces a choice is because she has decided her preference for May 15th matters more than my wedding." "I cannot believe you are being so stubborn about this," my mother said, abandoning her earlier emotional approach in favor of direct criticism. "You are acting selfishly and childishly, prioritizing your own desires over family unity. This is not how we raised you. You raised me to accommodate, to adjust, to accept that my needs came after everyone else's," I replied. "You raised me to be the daughter who does not cause problems or create conflict. And I fulfilled that role for 29 years. But I am getting married, starting my own family, and I am not willing to begin my marriage by teaching my husband that his wife's family expects her to always come last." The brunch ended shortly after that exchange, with my mother leaving in obvious distress and me remaining to finish my coffee in the quiet aftermath of confrontation. I felt simultaneously liberated and devastated, freed from years of unspoken resentment, but grieving the family harmony I had always hoped might eventually include genuine consideration for my needs. I spent the remainder of that weekend in Columbus, attempting to maintain normal family interactions, while the conflict simmered beneath every conversation. My father avoided discussing the situation entirely, changing the subject whenever it approached anything related to May 15th. Monica called to lecture me about the importance of family compromise, a sermon that felt particularly rich coming from someone who had never compromised her own priorities for anyone's convenience. Vanessa sent a series of text messages that vacillated between hurt feelings and passive-aggressive suggestions that I clearly did not understand the significance of motherhood. By the time I returned to Chicago, I had received no indication that anyone in my family intended to move Vanessa's baby shower. The implicit message was clear. They expected me to either reschedule my wedding or accept that my wedding day would be diminished by their absence. The assumption that I would ultimately yield to family pressure, that my resistance was merely initial stubbornness that would soften with time, pervaded every interaction. David recognized my emotional exhaustion immediately upon my return. We spent that evening discussing not just the immediate conflict, but the deeper patterns it revealed about my family relationships. He asked insightful questions that helped me articulate feelings I had suppressed for years, and his unwavering support strengthened my resolve to maintain my boundary, even as I grieved the family acceptance I had always wanted but never truly received. The following weeks brought a campaign of subtle and not-so-subtle pressure from various family members, each attempting to convince me that flexibility was the mark of maturity, and that insisting on my wedding date reflected poorly on my character. My mother called regularly with updates about baby shower planning, always delivered in a tone that suggested I was missing something wonderful by refusing to accommodate Vanessa's preference. Monica sent articles about wedding planning stress and the importance of maintaining family relationships, transparent attempts at manipulation disguised as helpful information. Vanessa posted regularly on social media about her pregnancy journey and her excitement about her upcoming baby shower, always carefully dated May 15th, a public pressure tactic designed to increase my discomfort. Through it all, I maintained my position with increasing certainty that I was not the one creating the conflict. I had chosen a wedding date through normal planning processes, sent advance notice to all guests, and proceeded with arrangements that involved significant financial commitments and coordination with dozens of vendors. Vanessa had subsequently chosen to schedule her event on the same date despite having numerous alternatives available. The family's insistence that I should be the one to adjust reflected decades of established patterns rather than any logical assessment of the situation. What I did not yet understand was how far my family would take their commitment to those patterns, or how completely they would demonstrate the hierarchy of importance they had always maintained. That revelation would come soon enough, delivered with a clarity that would eliminate any remaining ambiguity about where I stood in their priorities. The conflict over May 15th forced me to examine the architecture of my family relationships with a clarity I had avoided throughout my life. During the weeks following my decision to maintain my wedding date, I found myself revising memories that I had previously accepted without critical analysis, recognizing patterns that had been invisible when I was embedded within them. The process was uncomfortable, requiring me to acknowledge my own complicity in dynamics that had diminished me over decades. My earliest memory of feeling secondary in my family's hierarchy dated to elementary school. I was 7 years old, Monica was 12, and the family calendar revolved around her accelerated academic schedule and competitive debate tournaments. My own parent-teacher conferences were routinely rescheduled to accommodate Monica's events, a practice that my teacher noted with increasing frustration as the year progressed. When my second-grade class performed a musical program that I had been practicing for weeks, my parents arrived 40 minutes late because Monica's debate tournament had run over schedule. I performed my solo for an audience that did not include my family, then smiled through their apologies afterward, and accepted their explanation that Monica's competition was important and unpredictable. I told myself then, as I would tell myself countless times in subsequent years, that their choice made logical sense. Monica's debate tournament was a competitive event with rankings and recognition, while my musical program was a routine school function that many parents attended. The logic was sound, but it established a framework for evaluating importance that would govern family decisions for the next 2 decades. Events with external validation, with prizes or rankings or professional significance, took precedence over events whose value was primarily personal or emotional. By that measure, I rarely qualified as the priority. I was a solid student but not exceptional, earning grades that satisfied without impressing. I participated in activities without excelling at them, playing recreational soccer and taking piano lessons that never progressed beyond intermediate proficiency. I had friends without being popular, maintained social connections without generating the kind of adolescent drama that commanded parental attention. I was, in virtually every dimension, the child who required the least active management, and my parents responded to that reality by directing their finite time and energy toward my sisters who demanded more. When Vanessa was born during my 7th grade year, the family dynamics shifted again to accommodate an infant's needs. I understood intellectually that babies require significant attention, and I tried to be helpful rather than resentful. I babysat Vanessa when my parents needed to attend Monica's high school events. I entertained her during family dinners when she became fussy. I adjusted my own schedule to minimize disruption to the household routines that had been restructured around her nap times and feeding schedules. My cooperation was praised regularly. My mother frequently told relatives and friends how helpful I was with Vanessa, how I never complained about the attention the baby required, how mature I was for my age. The praise felt validating initially, confirmation that my accommodation served a valuable purpose. What I did not recognize until much later was that the praise functioned as reinforcement for behavior that benefited others at my expense, teaching me that my value in the family derived from my utility rather than my inherent worth. The pattern intensified throughout high school. Monica was attending an Ivy League university by then, and her achievements generated constant conversation and celebration. My parents displayed her academic awards prominently and mentioned her accomplishments in virtually every social interaction. When friends or neighbors asked about their children, my mother's response invariably began with an update about Monica's latest success before briefly acknowledging that I was doing well in school and Vanessa was growing quickly. I was a junior in high school when I made the honor roll for the first time, an achievement that required significant effort, given my merely above-average academic abilities. I was proud of my performance and excited to share the news with my family. That same week, Monica called to announce that she had been selected for a prestigious summer internship at a major law firm. an opportunity that virtually guaranteed admission to top law schools. My honor roll certificate was acknowledged with distracted congratulations before the conversation turned to Monica's internship and what it meant for her future career prospects. The juxtaposition taught me another lesson about relative importance. My achievement, meaningful within the context of my own abilities and efforts, could not compete for attention with Monica's objectively more impressive success. The rational part of my mind understood this hierarchy. Monica's internship was more significant in terms of future implications and competitive selectivity. But the emotional reality was that my accomplishment was diminished not because it lacked value, but because it occurred in proximity to something that overshadowed it. I learned to time my announcements strategically, waiting for periods when neither sister had recent achievements to share. I learned to frame my successes modestly, downplaying their significance to avoid seeming like I was competing for attention. I learned to be enthusiastic about my sister's accomplishments, performing the role of supportive family member so consistently that it became indistinguishable from genuine feeling. The summer before my senior year of high school, I was hospitalized with acute appendicitis. The pain had developed gradually over 2 days before becoming unbearable, and I had initially tried to manage it with over-the-counter medication rather than disrupting family plans. By the time I finally told my parents that something was seriously wrong, the appendix was at risk of rupturing and required immediate surgery. My mother accompanied me to the hospital, staying through the emergency room evaluation and surgical preparation. My father arrived shortly before I was taken to the operating room, squeezing my hand and assuring me that everything would be fine. The surgery proceeded without complications, and I woke in recovery feeling disoriented and uncomfortable but relieved that the acute pain had been resolved. When I was moved to a regular hospital room for overnight observation, both parents were present initially. My mother fussed over my comfort, adjusting pillows and checking with nurses about pain medication. My father sat beside the bed making awkward conversation, clearly uncomfortable in the medical setting but trying to provide support. For those first 2 hours I felt genuinely cared for, the focus of parental attention in a way that felt reassuring and affirming. Then my mother's phone rang. Vanessa, who was 10 years old and had been left with a neighbor during the medical emergency, had a volleyball game that evening. The game was part of a recreational league, not a competitive tournament, but Vanessa was upset that no one would be there to watch her play. My mother took the call in the hallway, and I could hear her reassuring Vanessa that someone would be there. When she returned to my hospital room, her expression was torn between competing obligations. Vanessa has a game in an hour, she explained. She is really upset that we are not there. Your father needs to get back to the office for a meeting he scheduled with a client. Would you be all right if I went to Vanessa's game? You are stable now, and the nurses are here if you need anything. The request was framed as a question, but the expectation was clear. I was stable, the acute crisis had passed, and my continued need for comfort was less important than Vanessa's desire to have family present at her recreational volleyball game. I responded as I had been trained to respond, with understanding and accommodation. Of course, I said, managing a smile despite the disappointment and residual pain medication haze. I am fine here. Go watch Vanessa play. My mother left with visible relief, grateful that I had not created additional conflict by expressing hurt feelings or asking her to stay. My father departed shortly after, awkwardly patting my arm and promising to return later that evening. I spent the next 6 hours alone in the hospital room, watched over by rotating nurses but absent the family presence I had expected. My parents did return eventually, bringing Vanessa along to visit briefly before taking her home for bedtime. They stayed another 30 minutes before leaving for the night, promising to return in the morning for my discharge. I told myself throughout that experience that their choices were reasonable. I was stable and receiving excellent medical care. Vanessa was only 10 and needed support. My father's client meeting was important for his business. All of these justifications were factually accurate, yet the emotional reality remained that I had undergone emergency surgery and been left alone for most of the recovery period because other obligations took precedence. College provided temporary escape from family dynamics, offering geographic distance and an environment where I could establish identity independent of my sister's achievements. I thrived in the relative anonymity of a large state university, discovering competence in business analysis and operations management that gave me confidence in my abilities. The consulting firm I joined after graduation valued the skills I had developed, and the positive feedback from supervisors and clients reinforced my sense of professional worth. Yet even as I built a career and created a life in Chicago that I found satisfying, family interactions continued to follow familiar patterns. When I called home to share news about a promotion, the conversation inevitably shifted to Monica's latest court case or Vanessa's social media following. When I visited Columbus for holidays, I was expected to help with meal preparation and household tasks, while my sisters were guests to be accommodated. When family conflicts arose, I was the one expected to compromise, to understand, to be flexible. The engagement to David represented my first major life decision that I made entirely independently, without seeking family approval or adjusting my plans to fit their preferences. I chose a partner based on compatibility and shared values, rather than how he would be perceived by my parents' social circle. I accepted a career opportunity that advanced my professional goals, rather than keeping me geographically proximate to family. I began building a life that centered my own priorities, and the shift felt both liberating and transgressive. My family's tepid response to my engagement should have been predictable based on decades of established patterns, yet I had hoped that such a significant milestone might prompt different treatment. The hope revealed my own continued investment in a fantasy of family relationships that had never matched reality. I wanted to believe that their lack of enthusiasm for my smaller achievements had been because those achievements were indeed smaller, and that a major life event like marriage would finally command the attention and celebration I had always craved. Instead, the engagement received perfunctory acknowledgement, quickly overshadowed by Vanessa's pregnancy announcement. The speed with which my wedding planning became invisible in the shadow of her baby preparations demonstrated that nothing fundamental had changed. I remained the daughter whose needs were negotiable, whose milestones were less important, whose accommodation was expected without reciprocation. The request that I move my wedding date to accommodate Vanessa's baby shower was simply the most explicit articulation of an implicit hierarchy that had governed family decisions throughout my life. What made this instance different was not the dynamic itself but my response to it. For the first time, I refused to automatically accommodate, declined to absorb the inconvenience, and insisted that my plans had equal validity to my sister's preferences. The family's reaction to my refusal revealed how deeply they had internalized the expectation of my compliance. My mother's tears and accusations of selfishness, Monica's lectures about maturity and compromise, Vanessa's hurt feelings and passive-aggressive social media posts all reflected genuine confusion that I was not fulfilling my assigned role. They were not consciously trying to diminish me. They had simply never questioned a dynamic that served their interests and relied on my continued cooperation. Understanding this pattern intellectually did not diminish its emotional impact. I grieved for the family relationships I had wanted but never truly had, mourned the acceptance I had sought but never received on terms that honored my worth. The grief was complicated by recognition of my own participation in maintaining dynamics that harmed me, my decades of accommodation that had taught my family to expect my continued flexibility. David provided steady support throughout this period of painful recognition. He helped me distinguish between healthy family loyalty and destructive self-abnegation, between reasonable compromise and unreciprocated sacrifice. His own family background gave him perspective on functional family dynamics, and his observations helped me recognize how abnormal many of my family's patterns actually were. His parents, whom I had met several times by this point, demonstrated care through consistent interest in my life, thoughtful questions about my work, and genuine enthusiasm about our upcoming marriage. They asked about my preferences for the wedding rather than assuming their own priorities should dominate. They offered help while respecting our autonomy to make our own decisions. They treated me as an individual whose needs and desires mattered intrinsically, not just in relation to how I could serve their interests. The contrast between David's family and my own was stark and painful. It illustrated what family relationships could look like when built on mutual respect, rather than hierarchical assumptions. It showed me that the accommodation I had performed for decades was not an inevitable feature of family life, but rather a specific dysfunction that I had been trained to accept as normal. As my wedding date approached without any indication that my family intended to attend, I faced a choice about how to proceed. I could make one final attempt at reconciliation, perhaps offering some face-saving compromise that might preserve relationships while still maintaining the fundamental boundary I had established. I could proceed with the wedding as planned and accept my family's absence as the natural consequence of their priorities. Or I could use this rupture as an opportunity for more fundamental transformation in how I engaged with my family going forward. The decision was complicated by competing desires. I wanted to maintain family relationships despite their flaws, holding on to hope that meaningful change might eventually occur. I wanted to stand firm in the boundary I had established, demonstrating that my needs were not infinitely flexible. I wanted to begin my marriage with integrity, teaching David's family and my own future children that self-respect was not negotiable, even when it created conflict. What I did not yet know was that my family's final decision about May 15th would remove any ambiguity about their priorities, forcing me to confront truths I had been avoiding throughout my adult life. That reckoning was approaching rapidly, and it would transform not just my relationships with my family, but my understanding of my own worth and the life I wanted to build. The weeks leading up to May 15th took on a surreal quality, as I simultaneously planned a wedding and prepared for the possibility that my immediate family would not attend. David and I reviewed our guest list repeatedly, adjusting seating arrangements and meal counts based on various scenarios. His parents would be there, along with extended family from Seattle who were excited to celebrate with us. My grandmother, my father's mother, who had always shown me more consistent affection than my parents, had confirmed her attendance despite my mother's obvious disapproval. Friends from college and consulting colleagues filled much of the guest list, people who had become chosen family through years of genuine reciprocal support. My work on the Detroit manufacturing turnaround had created friendships with several executives and plant managers who were delighted to celebrate my marriage. David's professional network similarly contributed guests who knew us as individuals rather than as members of a family system that had never quite fit. The wedding we had planned reflected our values and our vision for our partnership. The ceremony would be officiated by a colleague from David's previous company, someone who knew us both well enough to speak meaningfully about our relationship. The vows we had written emphasized mutual support, honest communication, and commitment to building a life that honored both our individual growth and our partnership. The reception would include speeches from friends who had witnessed our relationship develop, music that reflected our shared tastes, and food that represented our belief that celebrations should be generous and inclusive. What the wedding would not include, increasingly clearly, was my immediate family. 6 weeks before May 15th, my mother called with what she framed as a final attempt at resolution. She had been thinking about the situation, she explained, and had developed what she believed was a fair compromise. If I would agree to move my wedding to May 8th, 1 week earlier than originally planned, she would convince Vanessa to move her baby shower to May 15th as originally desired. This way, she reasoned, both events could proceed on dates close to our preferences without direct conflict. The proposal revealed so much about how my mother perceived fairness and compromise. She viewed my moving the wedding by 1 week as equivalent to Vanessa maintaining her preferred date, apparently unable to recognize that one scenario involved me absorbing all inconvenience and cost while the other involved Vanessa accepting exactly what she wanted. The 7-day shift would still require renegotiating vendor contracts, notifying 150 guests of the date change, adjusting travel arrangements and hotel accommodations, and accepting thousands of dollars in change fees and potential deposit losses. When I explained these practical obstacles, my mother dismissed them as manageable inconveniences. Surely vendors would work with us if we explained the family situation, she insisted. Guests would understand that circumstances required adjustment. The costs would be worth it to maintain family harmony. Her reasoning collapsed my significant disruption into minor inconvenience, while treating Vanessa's preference as an immutable constraint requiring accommodation. I declined the compromise with a clarity that surprised me. The wedding date is not changing, I said simply. If Vanessa proceeds with her baby shower on May 15th, she will do so knowing that it conflicts with my wedding. The choice about which event to attend is yours to make, and I will respect whatever you decide. But I will not move my wedding date 1 week or 1 day to make that choice easier for you. The conversation ended shortly after that exchange, with my mother expressing deep disappointment in my stubbornness, and warning that I would regret letting pride damage family relationships. Her prediction assumed that maintaining my boundary constituted pride rather than self-respect, that refusing exploitation was equivalent to creating conflict, rather than responding to it. 3 weeks before the wedding, my father called. His approach was more analytical than my mother's emotional appeals, presenting arguments framed in business logic that he assumed would resonate with my professional background. He had calculated the costs of moving the wedding date, estimated the inconvenience factors, and compared those against what he characterized as the relationship costs of maintaining my current position. According to his analysis, the financial cost of date changes was significant but manageable given my current income. The inconvenience to guests was real but not catastrophic, as most had flexible travel arrangements. The relationship cost, however, was in his assessment potentially permanent. Vanessa might never forgive me for forcing the family to choose between events. My mother would carry resentment about the conflict for years. Family gatherings would be tense and uncomfortable indefinitely. Therefore, he concluded, the rational choice was to accept the short-term costs of rescheduling in exchange for long-term family harmony. His business school analysis ignored the fundamental issue of principle, treating the situation purely as a cost-benefit calculation, without considering the precedent being set or the patterns being reinforced. I listened to his entire presentation before responding. Your analysis assumes that moving the wedding date restores family harmony, I observed. But harmony built on my continued accommodation of unreasonable demands is not harmony. It is simply the temporary absence of conflict that will resurface the next time someone expects me to sacrifice my needs for their convenience. The long-term relationship cost you are calculating is based on me refusing to continue an unsustainable pattern, not on me creating conflict. My father was silent for a long moment. I am trying to help you avoid a mistake, he finally said. Family is more important than pride. This is not about pride, I replied. This is about respect. If my family respected me, they would attend my wedding and Vanessa would choose a different date for her baby shower. The fact that we are having this conversation demonstrates exactly how little respect my priorities receive. He ended the call with the warning that I was making a choice I would regret, unable or unwilling to recognize that the choice had been made by my family, not by me. Their decision to prioritize Vanessa's preference over my wedding had already determined the outcome. I was simply refusing to obscure that choice by absorbing all consequences of it. 2 weeks before the wedding, the final confirmation arrived via text message in the family group chat. My mother announced that she and my father would be attending Vanessa's baby shower on May 15th. Monica added that she and her family would also be there. Vanessa posted a heart emoji. No one mentioned my wedding. No one acknowledged that they were choosing one daughter's party over another daughter's marriage. The decision was presented as a simple statement of attendance at an event, as though my wedding did not exist or had been cancelled rather than proceeding without them. I stared at the message for several minutes, reading and rereading the simple declarations that confirmed what I had known was coming but had hoped against. David found me sitting motionless on our couch, phone in hand, and read the message over my shoulder without needing explanation. He sat beside me, pulling me close, and I finally cried for the family acceptance I had wanted but would never receive, at least not on terms that honored my worth. The notification from my family that they would attend Vanessa's baby shower rather than my wedding arrived on a Tuesday evening in late April. By Wednesday morning, I had compartmentalized the emotional impact sufficiently to focus on the professional demands that required my attention. A major consulting engagement was reaching a critical phase, and the client depended on analysis I had been developing for weeks. Personal devastation would have to wait for moments when professional excellence was not required. This ability to segregate emotional turmoil from professional performance was a skill I had developed over years of managing family disappointments while maintaining career trajectory. The same week that my parents had chosen Monica's law school graduation over my college ceremony, I had delivered a final presentation for my capstone business project that earned the highest grade in the class. The month after being left alone in the hospital following appendix surgery, I had maintained perfect attendance and completed all assignments despite lingering discomfort. I had learned early that personal pain could not be allowed to compromise professional achievement, because professional achievement was the domain where I could prove worth that my family never seemed to recognize. The consulting firm where I had built my career over the past 7 years specialized in operational transformations for manufacturing and distribution companies. My particular expertise was in supply chain optimization and process improvement, technical specializations that required both analytical rigor and practical understanding of how production systems actually functioned. I had developed a reputation within the firm for diagnoses that identified root causes rather than symptoms, and for recommendations that balanced theoretical optimization with implementation reality. The engagement occupying my attention in late April involved a food processing company, based in Wisconsin, that had been losing market share due to quality problems and delivery delays. The company produced frozen prepared meals for retail grocery chains, operating 3 manufacturing facilities that together employed nearly 800 people. Private equity investors had acquired the company 18 months earlier with plans to expand production and increase profitability, but performance had deteriorated rather than improved under the new ownership. I had been assigned to lead the diagnostic phase of the engagement, spending 6 weeks analyzing operations across all 3 facilities. The work required detailed observation of production processes, extensive interviews with employees at every organizational level, and quantitative analysis of operational data that revealed patterns invisible to casual observation. I had walked production lines during multiple shifts, reviewed maintenance records going back 3 years, analyzed inventory turnover by product category and facility, and mapped the flow of materials from raw ingredient receipt through finished product shipment. What I discovered was a system that had been optimized for efficiency at the expense of effectiveness, creating brittleness that manifested as the quality and delivery problems that were destroying the business. The private equity owners had implemented aggressive cost reduction initiatives immediately after acquisition, cutting what they viewed as excess inventory, reducing maintenance staff, and pressuring plant managers to maximize throughput. These changes had generated short-term improvements in financial metrics, while simultaneously degrading the operational capabilities that sustained long-term performance. Inventory reductions had eliminated safety stock that previously buffered against supplier variability, meaning that any delay in raw material delivery now immediately disrupted production schedules. Maintenance staff cuts had shifted the operation from preventive maintenance to reactive repairs, increasing unplanned downtime and reducing equipment reliability. Throughput pressure had incentivized plant managers to minimize changeovers between product types, reducing schedule flexibility and making it impossible to respond to customer order changes without significant delays. The analysis revealed that the company's problems were not primarily operational, but rather strategic. The private equity playbook that worked well for businesses with stable demand and commodity products was actively harmful when applied to food manufacturing with variable customer requirements and stringent quality standards. Fixing the symptoms without addressing the underlying strategic misalignment would produce only temporary improvement before different problems emerged from the same root cause. Delivering this analysis to the private equity partners required both technical credibility and diplomatic skill. I needed to demonstrate that my diagnosis was based on rigorous analysis rather than subjective opinion, while simultaneously communicating that their own decisions had created the problems they had hired us to solve. The presentation I developed walked through the quantitative evidence methodically, showing how each cost reduction initiative had produced predictable downstream consequences that more than offset the direct savings. The presentation occurred on the Thursday following my family's announcement about the baby shower, and I delivered it with the focused intensity that always characterized my professional work. The private equity partners initially responded with skepticism, defending their decisions and questioning my analysis. I had anticipated this reaction and prepared additional supporting data that addressed every predictable objection. By the end of the 3-hour session, skepticism had shifted to reluctant acceptance that their strategy had been flawed, and that meaningful improvement would require them to reverse several of their initial changes. The managing partner of the private equity firm, a man named Richard Thornton who had built his career on operational improvements at manufacturing companies, pulled me aside after the presentation concluded. "That was one of the most thorough diagnoses I have seen in 20 years of working with consultants," he said. "You did not just identify what was wrong. You explained why it was wrong, how it got that way, and what underlying assumptions needed to change. That level of thinking is rare." His validation was professionally gratifying, confirming that my analysis had achieved its intended impact. More significantly, the engagement led to an expanded scope of work, where I would lead not just the diagnostic phase, but also the implementation of recommended changes. This represented a substantial career advancement, moving from analysis to execution and demonstrating the confidence that both my firm and the client had in my capabilities. David attended the client presentation at my invitation, sitting in the back of the conference room and observing as I navigated the challenging dynamics of telling powerful people that their decisions had been wrong. Afterward, as we drove back to Chicago, he reflected on what he had witnessed. "You were brilliant in there," he said. "The way you anticipated their objections and had data ready to address every pushback. The way you stayed calm when that one partner was essentially calling you incompetent. You commanded that room completely." His observation touched on something I had recognized about myself over years of professional development. I performed best under pressure, found clarity in complex problems, and maintained composure in confrontational situations. These strengths had made me effective as a consultant, but they had also masked underlying patterns in my personal life where I applied those same skills to managing family dynamics that should not have required constant management. I was good at staying calm when challenged, which meant I rarely expressed anger even when anger was justified. I was skilled at anticipating objections, which meant I often accommodated unreasonable requests to avoid conflict. I excelled at finding solutions to other people's problems, which meant I routinely prioritized others' needs over my own. The professional strengths that earned recognition and advancement in my career had become liabilities in personal relationships where they enabled exploitation rather than generating appreciation. The week following the client presentation brought another significant professional development. The senior partner at my consulting firm who oversaw the manufacturing practice requested a meeting to discuss my career trajectory. Amanda Richardson had been with the firm for 15 years, building the manufacturing practice from a minor specialty into one of the firm's most profitable service lines. She was known for developing junior consultants into client-facing leaders, and her interest in my career was both flattering and strategically important. We met for breakfast at a restaurant near the firm's offices, and Amanda began the conversation with characteristic directness. "I have been watching your work on the Wisconsin engagement, and I am impressed with both the quality of your analysis and how you managed a difficult client dynamic. That presentation last week demonstrated skills that typically take consultants another 3 to 5 years to develop. You are ready for the next level." She explained that the firm was creating a new role focused on leading complex operational transformations from diagnosis through implementation. The position would involve less travel than my current role but more strategic responsibility, serving as the primary client relationship manager for engagements that could span 12 to 18 months. The compensation would represent a 40% increase over my current salary, and successful performance would position me for partnership consideration within 3 years. The opportunity was extraordinary, representing career advancement that typically required significantly more experience than I had accumulated. Amanda's confidence in my readiness reflected years of strong performance evaluations and successful client engagements, but the timing felt almost surreal given the personal devastation I was simultaneously managing. My family had chosen to miss my wedding, yet my professional trajectory was accelerating in ways that exceeded my most optimistic projections. I accepted the position with gratitude for Amanda's confidence and excitement about the challenges it would present. As I walked back to my apartment after breakfast, I reflected on the strange duality of my current circumstances. Professionally, I was being recognized and rewarded for capabilities that had been developed through years of disciplined effort. Personally, I was being dismissed and devalued by people who should have celebrated my successes most enthusiastically. The contrast was disorienting, forcing me to reconcile incompatible realities about my worth and what determined it. David's professional situation was evolving in parallel with my own career developments, though his trajectory was even more dramatic. The industrial equipment manufacturer he had been hired to rescue 18 months earlier had achieved a remarkable turnaround under his leadership. He had stabilized labor relations by addressing legitimate worker grievances that previous management had ignored, improved product quality by investing in equipment maintenance and operator training, and expanded the customer base by delivering on commitments with unprecedented reliability. The private equity firm that owned the company was positioning it for sale, and the financial performance under David's leadership had attracted interest from strategic buyers who saw value in both the company's improved operations and the management team that had produced the transformation. David had been negotiating his own future as part of the sale discussions, recognizing that his value to potential acquirers extended beyond the current company to his demonstrated ability to lead operational turnarounds. These negotiations were reaching conclusion in the weeks before our wedding, adding another layer of complexity to an already intense period. David was potentially facing a significant career transition immediately after our marriage, which would require us to make joint decisions about geography and professional priorities. We discussed these possibilities during evening conversations in our apartment, weighing options and considering how different scenarios would affect our shared future. One potential acquirer was particularly interesting. Stratton Industrial Partners was a larger manufacturing company that specialized in acquiring underperforming industrial businesses and integrating them into a platform of related operations. They had approached David about remaining as CEO of the acquired company, while also taking on broader responsibilities for operational improvements across their portfolio. The role would be based in Chicago, eliminating relocation concerns, and would offer compensation that substantially exceeded even his current generous package. More significantly, the role would give David responsibility for multiple turnaround situations simultaneously, leveraging his expertise across a portfolio of companies rather than focusing on a single operation. The opportunity aligned perfectly with his professional strengths and his desire to have broader impact on manufacturing excellence. Preliminary discussions had gone well, and a formal offer was expected shortly after the acquisition closed. The timing meant that David and I would both be entering new professional phases immediately after our marriage, building careers that reflected our capabilities while simultaneously building a marriage that reflected our values. We found strange comfort in the professional demands that partially distracted from the personal pain of family rejection. Work provided concrete problems with analyzable solutions, a welcome contrast to family dynamics that resisted rational intervention. My grandmother, who had confirmed her attendance at our wedding despite my mother's obvious displeasure, called me during this period to offer support that was both practical and emotional. She was my father's mother, a woman in her late 70s who had raised 5 children, while also building a successful career as a high school mathematics teacher. She possessed a directness that had mellowed with age but remained fundamentally unchanged, and she had always treated me with a consistency that contrasted sharply with my parents' variable attention. "I am sorry your parents are making this choice," she said without preamble when I answered her call. "It is wrong and I have told them so. Your mother is behaving badly, prioritizing one daughter over another in a way that will damage your relationship permanently if she does not correct course. But she will not listen to me, so I am calling to tell you that I will be at your wedding, and I am proud of you for not backing down." Her validation carried weight because it came from someone who understood family dynamics from decades of experience, and who had no obvious incentive to take my side beyond believing it was correct. We talked for nearly an hour about the wedding plans, my career developments, and her own reflections on family patterns she had observed over years of watching her grandchildren grow. She shared observations about my father's tendency to avoid conflict by deferring to my mother's stronger personality, Monica's unconscious replication of my mother's favoritism patterns, and Vanessa's learned expectation that her preferences would be accommodated because they always had been. "Your father loves you," my grandmother said, "but he has never been brave enough to stand up to your mother when she makes decisions he privately disagrees with. He will regret not attending your wedding, but he will not find the courage to change his position." Monica sees herself as the standard bearer for family expectations, and she genuinely believes that maintaining family unity requires you to accommodate. And Vanessa has been indulged her entire life, so she truly does not understand that scheduling her baby shower on your wedding day was inconsiderate rather than simply unfortunate timing. Understanding their psychology did not eliminate the pain of their choice, but it provided context that was somehow comforting. They were not rejecting me out of malice but rather acting consistently with patterns that had been established over decades and reinforced through countless smaller incidents. My refusal to continue accommodating those patterns had disrupted a system that worked well for everyone except me, and their response reflected confusion and frustration that I was no longer performing my assigned role. The final weeks before the wedding passed in a blur of professional intensity and personal preparation. I finalized the details for the Wisconsin food processing engagement, while simultaneously confirming vendor arrangements for the wedding. David negotiated the terms of his potential new role, while we reviewed seating charts that now had empty spaces where my immediate family should have been. We wrote vows that reflected our commitment to building a partnership based on mutual respect and honest communication, implicitly acknowledging that we were creating something different from the family patterns we had each witnessed. My professional accomplishments during this period were significant enough that they would have normally commanded substantial attention and celebration. The promotion to the new strategic role at my consulting firm represented years of career progression, compressed into a single advancement. The successful completion of the Wisconsin diagnostic phase had generated internal recognition and additional client interest. Amanda Richardson had mentioned me in partnership meetings as someone with exceptional potential who was being developed for leadership roles. Yet none of these achievements generated any acknowledgement from my family. I mentioned the promotion during a phone call with my mother, and she offered distracted congratulations before returning to a discussion of baby shower menu planning. I sent an email to my father describing the client presentation and Richard Thornton's positive feedback, and he responded with a brief note saying he was glad my work was going well. Monica and Vanessa did not acknowledge my career news at all, absorbed in their own professional and personal priorities. The pattern was so familiar that I barely registered the disappointment, having learned over decades not to expect enthusiasm for my achievements. What was different this time was my recognition that the pattern reflected their limitations rather than my inadequacy. Their inability to celebrate my success was about their restricted capacity for interest in experiences that did not directly affect them, not about any deficiency in the accomplishments themselves. David's parents provided a stark contrast. When I shared the news about my promotion during a video call, they expressed genuine excitement and asked detailed questions about what the new role would involve and how it represented career advancement. They wanted to understand the significance of the opportunity within my industry context, demonstrating interest in my professional life that went beyond perfunctory acknowledgement. Their engagement illustrated that family celebration of achievements was possible when relationships were built on actual interest in each other's lives, rather than performative connection. As May 15th approached, I found myself surprisingly calm about my family's absence from the wedding. The initial devastation had transformed into something closer to resigned acceptance, an acknowledgement that they had shown me exactly where I stood in their priorities, and that denying that reality would serve no useful purpose. I had hoped for different treatment, had believed that my wedding might finally command the attention and celebration that smaller milestones had not, but hoping for change did not create it. What I did have was a career that reflected years of disciplined effort and demonstrated capabilities that earned recognition from people whose judgment I respected. I had built professional expertise that created value for clients and generated opportunities for continued growth. I had developed skills that allowed me to analyze complex problems, navigate difficult interpersonal dynamics, and deliver results under pressure. These accomplishments were mine regardless of whether my family acknowledged them, and they provided foundation for the life I was building with David. The week before the wedding, I received an unexpected email from Richard Thornton, the private equity managing partner who had praised my analysis of his food processing company. He was writing to thank me again for the work I had done, and to mention that his firm was considering engaging my consulting firm for additional portfolio company assignments. More personally, he noted that he had been impressed not just by my technical analysis, but by the leadership presence I had demonstrated in challenging client interactions. Leadership presence was not a phrase I had previously applied to myself, but his observation prompted reflection on how I had developed that quality through years of professional challenges. I had learned to command rooms because I had prepared thoroughly enough to have confidence in my analysis. I had maintained composure under pressure because I had practiced emotional regulation in family situations where expressing hurt or anger was discouraged. I had navigated difficult conversations because I had years of experience managing expectations and finding compromises that preserved relationships while achieving objectives. These skills had been developed partially through deliberate professional development, but also through the unintended consequences of family dynamics that required constant management. The same patterns that had diminished me personally had simultaneously built capabilities that served me professionally. The duality was complex, neither purely harmful nor purely beneficial, but rather a mixed legacy that I would carry forward regardless of how my family relationships evolved. The pattern of service that characterized my relationship with my family had not emerged suddenly, but had accumulated through thousands of small accommodations over decades. Each individual instance seemed reasonable in isolation: a sister helping with a project, a daughter managing holiday logistics, a family member stepping in during a crisis. The pattern became visible only when viewed collectively, revealing a persistent directionality where assistance flowed consistently from me toward others without meaningful reciprocation. The Christmas when I was 14 provided an early example of dynamics that would repeat with variations throughout my adolescence and adulthood. Monica was home from college for winter break, preparing applications for summer internships at prestigious law firms. The applications required extensive essays and careful attention to detail, and Monica approached the process with characteristic intensity. She commandeered the family dining room table as her workspace, spreading documents and reference materials across every available surface. My own school break included a major history project that required significant research and writing. I had planned to use the dining room table for my work as well, given that it was the only space in our house with adequate lighting and room to organize materials. When I attempted to claim a section of the table for my project, Monica objected that she needed the entire space for her internship applications, and that her timeline was more pressing than mine. My mother intervened by suggesting that I could work in my bedroom instead, using my desk for the research materials. The suggestion seemed reasonable on its surface, though it ignored that my desk was substantially smaller than the dining room table and poorly positioned relative to natural light. More significantly, the resolution of the conflict established that Monica's work took precedence over mine in claiming shared family resources, a hierarchy that would be repeated countless times in subsequent years. I completed my history project working in inadequate conditions, receiving a grade that was strong but not exceptional. Monica secured a prestigious internship that launched her legal career. The family celebrated her success enthusiastically, while my solid performance passed without particular notice. The lesson was clear though never explicitly articulated. Monica's achievements warranted accommodation and celebration, while my efforts merited neither disruption to family routines nor special recognition. The summer I turned 16, Vanessa was 9 years old and enrolled in an intensive soccer program that required transportation to practices 5 evenings per week and games every Saturday. My mother had recently accepted a demanding volunteer position with a local arts organization that involved frequent evening meetings. My father's work schedule made him unavailable for most of the required transportation. The solution to this logistical challenge was apparently obvious to everyone. I would drive Vanessa to soccer. I had received my driver's license only months earlier, and had been looking forward to the independence it would provide. Instead, I found myself functioning as Vanessa's personal chauffeur, restructuring my own summer plans around her athletic schedule. When friends invited me to evening activities, I had to decline because I was driving Vanessa to practice. When I wanted to take a weekend job to earn spending money, I was told that Saturdays were unavailable because of Vanessa's games. The arrangement was presented not as a request but as an expectation, a natural deployment of available family resources to solve a logistical problem. No one asked whether I had other plans for my summer, or whether the transportation demands would interfere with my own activities. The assumption was that my time was available for family needs, and my compliance with that assumption reinforced its continued application. That summer established a pattern where my newly acquired driving privileges translated primarily into additional service obligations, rather than personal freedom. I drove my grandmother to medical appointments when my mother's schedule was full. I picked up groceries when my father was working late. I transported Vanessa to social events, music lessons, and various activities that her active social calendar required. My car became less a vehicle for my own independence than a family resource available for collective deployment. The expectation that I would provide these services without compensation or even consistent acknowledgement taught me that my value within the family derived substantially from my utility. I was appreciated when I was useful, when I solved problems or filled gaps that others could not or would not address. This appreciation felt validating initially, creating a sense of purpose and importance. Only years later did I recognize that being valued for utility was fundamentally different from being valued for inherent worth, and that the former could never fully satisfy the human need for the latter. College provided temporary escape from these service patterns, though they resumed immediately upon my return to Columbus for breaks and visits. During my sophomore year winter break, Monica was preparing for law school entrance exams. She requested that I quiz her on practice questions, review her essay responses, and help her maintain focus through long study sessions. The assistance she requested required hours of my break time, but refusing seemed unthinkable given the importance of her exam performance to her future career. I spent much of that winter break in Monica's apartment, reading questions from test preparation books and evaluating her timed essays according to rubrics provided by her expensive exam preparation course. The work was tedious and offered no benefit to my own academic development, but Monica expressed genuine gratitude for the assistance and credited my help with improving her confidence. Her eventual acceptance to Yale Law School was celebrated as a family triumph, and I took some satisfaction in knowing that my contribution had supported that achievement. What I did not consider until much later was that Monica had never offered reciprocal assistance with my own academic challenges. When I struggled with advanced statistics during my junior year, she was too absorbed in law school demands to provide the mathematical expertise she certainly possessed. When I was preparing for interviews with consulting firms during my senior year, she offered only generic advice about professional presentation, rather than leveraging her own interview experience to provide substantive guidance. The exchange was persistently unidirectional, with my labor supporting her advancement, while my own development proceeded without her investment. After graduation, when I moved to Columbus to begin my consulting career, family service expectations intensified. My parents were aging into the phase of life where household maintenance tasks became more challenging. My father's accounting practice consumed increasing amounts of his time, as he worked to maintain competitiveness against larger firms with more resources. My mother's volunteer commitments expanded as she sought to fill time that had previously been occupied by active parenting. Both increasingly relied on me to address problems that they found inconvenient or overwhelming. The first call came on a Saturday morning 6 months into my first consulting job. My mother's garage door opener had malfunctioned, leaving her car trapped inside. Could I come over and help figure out what was wrong? I drove to their house, diagnosed the problem as a failed motor unit, researched replacement options, ordered the necessary part, and returned the following weekend to install it. The repair saved them the cost of a professional service call and the inconvenience of coordinating with a repair technician. My competence in solving that problem established me as the family member to contact for household issues. When the kitchen faucet began leaking, I received a call. When the basement flooded after heavy rain, I coordinated with a waterproofing company and managed the repair process. When my father's computer developed performance problems, I spent an evening diagnosing and resolving the issues. Each successful intervention reinforced the pattern, demonstrating that I was capable and available, and willing to address problems that others found burdensome. The requests expanded beyond household maintenance to include event planning and family coordination. When my parents decided to host Thanksgiving dinner for extended family, my mother asked if I would handle the logistics. The request seemed reasonable given my professional expertise in project management and my apparent free time as a single woman without children. I created detailed timelines for meal preparation, coordinated with relatives about attendance and dietary restrictions, and managed the day of execution to ensure everything proceeded smoothly. The Thanksgiving dinner was successful by all measures, with relatives praising the food quality and the seamless organization. My mother accepted the compliments graciously, mentioning that I had helped with planning but presenting the achievement as primarily her own. The following year, Thanksgiving planning was again delegated to me with even less pretense that my mother would be meaningfully involved. The pattern had been established. I was the family event planner, responsible for transforming vague desires for gatherings into concrete reality. Monica's wedding 4 years before my own provided the most extensive demonstration of how thoroughly I had been integrated into a service role within family dynamics. The wedding was conceived as a major social event that would showcase family status and success. My mother appointed herself as the primary coordinator, but quickly became overwhelmed by the complexity of managing vendors, tracking details, and making countless decisions required for an elaborate celebration. I was recruited to assist with planning despite being in the midst of a demanding consulting engagement that required extensive travel. My weekends for 6 months became devoted to wedding tasks. I researched and evaluated catering options, visited venues to assess their suitability, reviewed contracts to identify potential problems, and created detailed timelines that coordinated activities across dozens of vendors. I designed a comprehensive planning system that tracked every element from invitations to transportation logistics. Monica appreciated my contributions with periodic expressions of gratitude, though she also critiqued elements that did not meet her exacting standards. The floral arrangements I had negotiated were beautiful, but not exactly the shade she had envisioned. The timeline I had created was comprehensive, but did not allow enough buffer time between ceremony and reception. My work was good but never quite excellent, adequate but always requiring her refinement to achieve the perfection she demanded. The wedding itself was magnificent, a showcase event that generated exactly the social recognition my family desired. Photographs appeared in local society publications. Guests praised the elegance and attention to detail. Monica and her new husband departed for an elaborate honeymoon in Europe, exhausted but satisfied with the celebration. I returned to my consulting work, depleted from months of unpaid event planning labor that had been performed in addition to my professional responsibilities. No one suggested that I should be compensated for the hundreds of hours I had invested in making Monica's wedding successful. The labor was framed as family contribution, as the natural expression of sisterly love and support. The assumption that my time was available for deployment in service of family needs had become so thoroughly normalized that even questioning it seemed inappropriate. Vanessa's transition to adulthood brought different service expectations, but equally persistent demands on my resources. Unlike Monica, whose needs centered on practical assistance with projects and events, Vanessa required emotional support and crisis management. Her romantic relationships followed a pattern of intense involvement followed by dramatic dissolution, with each breakup generating urgent calls seeking consolation and advice. Her career uncertainty prompted frequent conversations where she processed options while I listened and offered perspective. These interactions required substantial emotional labor, absorbing her distress and anxiety while maintaining calm, supportive presence. The conversations were lengthy and recursive, covering the same territory repeatedly as Vanessa worked through feelings without reaching resolution. I became her emotional processing partner, providing the steady presence that allowed her to eventually find clarity. The role felt meaningful initially, evidence that I could provide value through emotional availability, even if I lacked Monica's academic brilliance or Vanessa's natural charisma. The pattern became problematic when I recognized that the emotional support was entirely unidirectional. When I experienced my own professional disappointments or relationship challenges, Vanessa was consistently unavailable. She would listen for a few minutes before redirecting the conversation to her own concerns, or she would offer superficial reassurance without genuine engagement with my situation. Her capacity for emotional support extended only to receiving it, not providing it, and my attempts to shift our dynamic were met with confusion or mild offense. The most revealing incident occurred during my third year in Chicago, when I was managing a particularly difficult consulting engagement that required me to deliver recommendations that would result in significant workforce reductions. The ethical weight of the analysis troubled me deeply, recognizing that my technical recommendations would translate into dozens of people losing their employment. I called Vanessa seeking emotional support, needing to process the moral complexity of work that was professionally necessary, but personally disturbing. She listened for approximately 5 minutes before interrupting to discuss a conflict she was having with her boyfriend. The boyfriend had failed to appreciate a social media post she had carefully crafted, and she needed to process her feelings about this perceived slight. My attempt to return the conversation to my own concerns was met with impatience. She was dealing with a crisis, she explained, and needed support right now. Could we talk about my work situation another time when she was less stressed? The interaction crystallized the fundamental inequality in our relationship. My role was to provide emotional labor that supported her processing and development. Her role was to receive that labor without reciprocal obligation. The arrangement worked well for her, providing consistent access to empathetic listening, without the burden of having to offer the same in return. For me, the arrangement created persistent emotional depletion, without the nourishment that genuine reciprocal connection provides. These service patterns extended beyond my immediate family to the broader network of relatives and family friends. I became the person who organized milestone birthday celebrations for aunts and uncles, who coordinated holiday gift exchanges among cousins, who remembered to send cards and maintain connections that others allowed to lapse. The role of family coordinator was never formally assigned, but emerged organically from my consistent performance of connective labor that others did not prioritize. The work was simultaneously meaningful and exhausting. I valued family connection and found satisfaction in creating experiences that brought people together. Yet the persistent responsibility for maintaining those connections while others benefited without contributing created resentment that I struggled to acknowledge. Admitting resentment felt like admitting failure to be the generous, accommodating person I believed I should be. The internal conflict was draining, requiring constant suppression of feelings that seemed illegitimate, even as they intensified. My professional development during these years proceeded in parallel with these family service patterns, and the skills required for each domain increasingly overlapped. Consulting work required managing client expectations, navigating interpersonal dynamics, and delivering value while maintaining relationships, even when recommendations were unwelcome. Family coordination required similar competencies, managing expectations, navigating dynamics, and delivering value through service while maintaining relationships, even when contributions went unrecognized. The professional environment provided validation that family relationships did not. Clients expressed gratitude for my work, compensated me appropriately for my time, and recognized my contributions explicitly. Supervisors provided detailed feedback that acknowledged both strengths and areas for development. Colleagues treated my time as valuable, scheduling meetings efficiently and respecting boundaries around availability. The contrast with family interactions, where my contributions were expected rather than appreciated and my time was treated as infinitely available, became increasingly difficult to ignore. David entered my life during the period when these contrasts were becoming most apparent. His respect for my professional capabilities extended naturally into respect for my personal boundaries. He asked whether I was available before making plans that involved my time. He expressed appreciation for efforts I made on his behalf rather than treating them as expected service. He reciprocated emotional support, offering the same careful listening and thoughtful engagement that I provided to him. The relationship illustrated that the service patterns I had accepted as normal family dynamics were not inevitable features of close relationships, but rather specific dysfunctions that I had been trained to accommodate. David's consistent demonstration of reciprocal respect and mutual consideration showed me what balanced partnership could look like, and the contrast with family relationships became impossible to ignore. When Vanessa announced her pregnancy, I anticipated that service expectations would intensify. New motherhood would generate legitimate needs for support, and I expected to be called upon to provide assistance in ways that might be genuinely helpful. What I did not anticipate was how thoroughly her pregnancy would consume all family attention and resources, transforming every interaction into an opportunity to discuss her needs while rendering my own life increasingly invisible. The baby shower conflict represented the culmination of decades of service patterns, where my time and effort were consistently deployed in support of family needs without reciprocal consideration. The expectation that I would move my wedding to accommodate Vanessa's party preference was simply the most explicit articulation of an assumption that had governed family dynamics throughout my life. My time was negotiable. My commitments were flexible. My needs were secondary. These assumptions had been tested and confirmed through thousands of smaller interactions, creating a foundation of expectation that my family saw no reason to question. My refusal to accommodate represented a fundamental disruption to patterns that had been mutually reinforcing for nearly 3 decades. The family's shock and resistance reflected genuine confusion about why I was suddenly refusing to perform a role I had filled reliably throughout our shared history. From their perspective, I was changing the rules of engagement without warning or justification. From my perspective, I was finally insisting on terms that honored my worth rather than simply my utility. Meeting David had not been part of any deliberate plan to transform my life or challenge family dynamics. The introduction occurred through the mundane circumstance of professional assignment, a consulting engagement that placed me in proximity to someone whose presence would eventually catalyze recognition of patterns I had accepted as immutable. The transformation he represented was not immediate rescue or dramatic intervention, but rather the gradual illumination that comes from experiencing a fundamentally different relational framework. The manufacturing company where we met was located in suburban Detroit, a facility that produced automotive components in a declining industrial corridor that had seen better economic times. The company employed approximately 400 people across production, maintenance, quality control, and administrative functions. Private equity investors had acquired the operation 6 months before my consulting firm was engaged, and the initial financial analysis suggested that the business was salvageable if operational improvements could be implemented rapidly. I arrived for my first site visit on a Monday morning in early autumn, carrying the analytical frameworks and diagnostic protocols that I had applied to dozens of similar engagements. The plant manager who met me at the reception area was cordial but skeptical, having experienced previous consultants whose recommendations had been theoretically sound but practically unimplementable. He walked me through the facility with the resigned efficiency of someone fulfilling an obligation rather than seeking genuine partnership. David was waiting in the conference room that had been designated as my workspace for the engagement. He had been appointed Chief Operating Officer 3 weeks earlier, brought in by the private equity firm to lead the operational transformation that my analysis would support. At 34, he possessed the particular combination of technical expertise and practical wisdom that distinguished truly effective operational leaders from those who merely understood theory without grasping implementation reality. Our initial interaction was professionally adversarial in the way that often characterizes relationships between external consultants and internal executives. David had clear opinions about what the company needed, opinions formed through 3 weeks of intensive observation and informed by years of operational experience. My preliminary analysis, based on financial data and limited site observation, suggested that several of his assumptions were incomplete or potentially incorrect. Neither of us was inclined toward diplomatic accommodation of perspectives we believed were flawed. The first meeting extended well beyond its scheduled 90 minutes, as we debated inventory management philosophy, production scheduling methodology, and the relationship between quality control and throughput optimization. David argued from practical experience, citing specific examples from his previous turnaround work. I countered with analytical rigor, presenting data patterns that revealed underlying dynamics not immediately visible through observation alone. The debate was intense but not personal, driven by mutual commitment to solving problems rather than protecting ego. By the conclusion of that initial meeting, we had reached unexpected alignment on several key diagnostic questions. David's practical insights had identified operational bottlenecks that my quantitative analysis could measure and characterize. My analytical framework had revealed systemic patterns that explained phenomena David had observed but not fully understood. The complementary nature of our perspectives suggested that collaboration might produce better outcomes than either approach alone could generate. Over the subsequent weeks, our professional relationship deepened through the intensive problem-solving work that operational turnarounds require. I spent long days on the production floor observing processes, interviewing workers, and collecting data that would inform recommendations. David spent similar hours analyzing equipment performance, negotiating with suppliers, and rebuilding relationships with demoralized employees. We reconvened each evening to compare observations, debate interpretations, and refine our understanding of the company's challenges. These working sessions gradually incorporated personal conversation alongside professional discussion. We discovered shared experiences of being underestimated based on appearance or background, of having to prove competence repeatedly in environments that question credentials. David described growing up as the son of immigrants in communities where his family's cultural difference marked them as perpetual outsiders. I shared experiences of being dismissed in professional settings because my analytical conclusions contradicted the preferences of powerful people who expected validation rather than honest assessment. The conversations revealed fundamental compatibility in how we approached both professional challenges and personal relationships. David valued competence and directness, appreciating clear communication even when messages were uncomfortable. He respected expertise while remaining intellectually humble, willing to revise positions when presented with compelling contrary evidence. He demonstrated emotional intelligence that manifested as genuine curiosity about other people's perspectives, rather than performative empathy, designed to manage impressions. These qualities contrasted sharply with relational patterns I had experienced in family contexts. My family valued accommodation over directness, preferring that difficult truths remain unspoken to preserve superficial harmony. They demonstrated selective respect for expertise, valuing credentials and status markers, while dismissing substantive capability when it challenged their preferences. Their emotional engagement was often transactional, deployed strategically to achieve specific outcomes, rather than reflecting genuine interest in understanding experiences different from their own. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.